Today we're going to be talking about Madame Blavatsky, medium and magician. Here we go. So, uh, you know, the history and beliefs surrounding Helena Petrovna Blavatsky is really steeped in mystery and controversy, and is perhaps it is oddly expected in someone so widely regarded as one of the most important figures in reviving Western esotericism, right, in the 19th century. She combined Greco-Roman philosophies like Hermeticism and Neoplatonism with Eastern philosophies, right? Most notably Hinduism and Buddhism, right? She came from a wealthy Russian German family in Ukraine. So she does come from Ukraine, which has quite a bit of relevance in right now. She's largely self-educated. Blavatsky claimed to have traveled much of the world in search of wisdom. Eventually, she will found the Theosophical Society in 1875 and published the famous work known as Isis Unveiled, 1877. Although she was kind of upset with that title because just something you may not know, she wanted the title to not to be uh, Isis Unveiled, but uh, the Unveiled Isis. But whatever. Okay, so anyway, moving right along, and she is viewed as creating a synthesis of science and religion and philosophy all together. Some people see her as a guru. Some people see her as a spiritual master. Some people say that she is a spiritualist or a charlatan. She is very misunderstood. And so today I'm going to go through her life story and her ideas, and maybe we can give some context to it. Now, I do have to say that she does have some pretty interesting fans that appreciated her over the years. I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of Jack London or Henry Miller or D.H. Lawrence or Jean Sibelius, right? Or Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison really liked her. Lewis Carroll, E.M. Foster, Carl Jung, Thornton Wilder. I think you get the point. So she's had some very famous people who really admired her, including, of course, going further, you're going to have Mahatma Gandhi really admire her as well. So she does have lots of fans. Now, let's go with some scholars. The reason why I'm going to bring this scholar specifically up is his name is James Santucci, and he teaches at a wonderful school. It's called Cal State Fullerton, where I happen to teach also. And he teaches in a wonderful department, and that's some religious studies department where I also teach. And he actually is a scholar that focuses much of his work on theosophical history. He has a lot of credibility. And he says this. He says, all too often, this subject, referring to Theosophy and Blavatsky, when it is discussed in scholarly circles, is presented in a most unscholarly fashion. Falsehoods are perpetuated and original research is not actively pursued. And I have to say that is absolutely true. That's absolutely true. The thing is, I'm going through these various sources, and I realize there's so much bias against her that starts all the way back in the 19th century. And in many cases, some of these claims are unfounded, which we'll go into. There's others that have said that that she is a fraud. David Reagan, a scholar of Sanskrit, says that scholars have not taken to Blavatsky seriously because it is generally accepted that she was proven to be a fraud. There was therefore no reason or need to evaluate her writings. However, he continues that 1986 century-old report, which is primarily responsible for branding her as a fraud, was itself put in serious doubt. It turns out that the acclamation against her was also much conjecture. So, and you have others like Ronald Hutton, who says that She is the century's truly international figures and considerably popular and so forth and so on. So scholars still know what to think about her, But so who was Blavatsky? Well, Blavatsky, she was born as Helena Petrovna von Hon. She was born in the Ukrainian town of Yekaterinburg, which was then part of the Russian Empire. And she was born on August 12th, 1831. And she was very quickly baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church. The reason why is there happened to be a cholera epidemic at that time, and it was really impacting her town pretty hard. So they wanted to make sure that she was baptized before she died. But fortunately, very much so, she survived. She was born to her 17-year-old mother, a certain Helena von Hon, who did also unfortunately catch cholera, but she did survive. Her mother happened to come from royal stock. She was a daughter of Princess Elena Antonovna Dolgorukova. Love that name, right? Who, like her daughter and granddaughter, was self-educated. Blavatsky's father was a certain Peter Alexandrovich von Hon, who is a direct descendant of the German von Hon family. They were also aristocratic stock. In fact, a direct descendant of the of the German von Hon family. He served in the Russian Royal House Artillery and held the rank of colonel. And when she was born, when little Helena was born, this time, this may be hard to believe, but Russia was attacking Poland. There's a Russian-Polish war going on. Again, there's interesting threads of commonality here, but there it is. So she didn't see her father, who was serving with the Russians, until she was 6 months old. So now, what will happen is the father will return to the town, and they will move, and eventually they end up in Odessa in 1835, where Blavatsky's maternal grandfather lived and working as a civil administrator. And here in Odessa, Blavatsky's sister, Vera, was born. Why that's important is that her sister, throughout the years, writes about Blavatsky's life. That's one of our sources of information, especially during the so-called dark periods where we don't know much about her. Now Blavatsky's mother, what happens is they go from Odessa and they move to St. Petersburg. And her mom she was a novelist. Yeah, she was a writer. And so she wrote under different names as a novelist. So you can see where Helena gets her literal penchant right there to enjoy various reading, for example. But what I think is fascinating about the mom is that she was also a translator. Well, she's the one who translated into the Russian language from English the works of Edward Bulwer Lytton. Now you're going, Edward Bulwer Lytton. Well, who in the world is that? Okay, so we may not know his name, but we do know some of his famous phrases. Once I say this phrase, you'll know exactly who he is. The pen is mightier than the sword. Yeah, that's the guy that coined that word. Well, she would have to translate that into Russian, right? He was the one who wrote the famous opening phrase that's oftentimes made fun of now. It was a dark and stormy night. He was the one who said that the idea of the pursuit of the almighty dollar, or the great unwashed, and so forth. So a lot of cliches come from this man. And I'm sorry, I don't have it translated into Russian, but there you have it. Now, What will happen is, as you can imagine, Blavatsky's already moving from place to place. This is the way her father's job was like, kind of a rootless kind of existence. And that may have influenced Blavatsky later on. All right, now we go somewhere. Around 1837, it turned out that Fidel, who was, of course, the grandfather, was assigned to become a trustee for the Kalamic peoples of Central Asia. The Kalamic peoples of Central Asia. When he did so, Blavatsky and her mother accompanied him to Astrakhan. Now, this is located right along the Volga River, where they actually befriended one of the leaders, the Kalmyk, by the name of Tumen. Now, why am I bringing this up? Seems to be, well, this is the beginning of something. The Kalmyks, they were Mongols that originated from Western Mongolia. They came in 1724 they actually fell under Imperial Russia. The Kalmyks were practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. I know. What are the chances that she ends up amongst people who are Buddhists in Russia? So there she is. This is Blavatsky's first experience with a religion outside of Russian Orthodox. Now, while she's only 6 at this time, don't worry, because she'll return back during her teens. So this during the summer, and so this is not the end of this, but this is the beginning of this connection of being curious about belief systems outside of her own. The Kalmyks practiced a kind of Buddhism known as Geluk, as founded by Ji Tonskapa, who lived from 1357 to 1419. By the way, his name means, it sounds pretty cool, Ji Tonskapa, right? It actually translates as the man from Onion Valley. So anyway, it was founded by the man from Onion Valley. And he had a Mongolian father and a Tibetan mother. And he claimed to be filled with the power of the 3 most wrathful deities of Tibetan Buddhism. So he's filled with this power. First of all, he's filled with the spirit of Aruka. And then second, Havaja. And finally, Yamataka. So these are known as the wisdom kings because they are very fierce, but very fierce, at least in their faces, so to speak. And then he himself thought he was the emanation of a bodhisattva. So there you have it. He thought he had a prajna of insight. He taught that there's nothing that has an existence of its own, but always comes into existence independence of other things. And so, since objects do not exist through their own name, they are only established as existing through the force of convention. So these are some of the early ideas that she's going to be encountering and will be encountering to her early teens. So Blavatsky again is mixing with different perspectives. Now, what happens now is that in 1838, when she was 7, Blavatsky's mother moved her daughters with her husband to Platova. Here, she learned how to play the piano, and she got proper dance lessons. Well, at least that's what they, tried to do that. But I got to tell you, Blavatsky was mischievous as a child. She was described as a wayward, invalid child. She was also understood as quite a storyteller. She loved to tell stories. She loved to make things up and have people listen to her. She loved that attention. And she started that pretty early on, right? they kind of looked down on her because she liked to mix not with the wealthy kids, but with the poor kids, those who are, and they seem to have a natural, they seem to like her, seem to gravitate toward her. She was also educated in French. She learned art, so that was good. And then she also learned how to ride a horse. Where she learned to ride the horse is when she went back to Alamek for the summer. Yeah, you remember I told you about this? What happens is that she learned horse riding while there when she was a teenager now from the Calamics, and she did learn also some of the Tibetan language. So again, she's being immersed in this other culture, which is a Buddhist culture. In fact, though, during this period of time, she discovered that there was the personal library of a maternal great grandfather, a certain Prince Pavel, and it contained all these books on esoteric subjects, and she was absolutely fascinated. Now, he was into Freemasonry in the 1770s. He belonged to what's called eventually the rite of strict observance. Now, this rite of strict observance was very German, and it was the people in charge supposedly were these unknown superiors. He was initiate. But I do have to say it's kind of interesting because they were actually on a mission, this particular rite, to reform much of these lodges from, of all things, the occult sciences. So he's joining an order that seems to be against the occult sciences to kind of clean them up, so to speak. And yet, when you look at his library, it's filled with abundance of books on just the very thing that he was supposedly fighting against. And you can imagine Blavatsky is loving this. Well, according to the next step here, is Blavatsky supposedly met at this time spirits. That's right, spirits. One was Alessandro Cogliostro, and this was an Italian adventurer and a South style magician, and he was known for psychic healing and alchemy and scrying, right? And the idea is that he is present. Well, we'll talk more about this in a few moments. We'll go. He also met She also met Saint Germain supposedly during this period of time. Saint Germain again is a very controversial topic. They describe him as a courtier, a charlatan, alchemist, a violinist. He composed music. He was very popular, right? And Blavatsky identifies him as one of the masters of ancient wisdom. And he is said to have all these powers and a very long life. There's a story. I feel like I'm Blavatsky. There's a story where it is said that Sir Francis Bacon actually faked his own death. This happened to be on Easter Sunday of April 9th, 1626. That he went to his own funeral, and then he left England and headed off to Transylvania, where he found a castle. And there, by using alchemy, he went through his transformation and became Saint Germain, one of the masters of ancient wisdom. And so these are, by those who are Theosophists, believe that he is one who forms a spiritual hierarchy of the planet Earth. Sometimes they're also known as the Ascended Masters, right? So Saint Germain was a manifestation of the resurrected form of Sir Francis Bacon. And so Blavatsky claims that during this period of time, when She is in Russia. She's visited by Saint Germain. Blavatsky also claims that she was visited by this mysterious Indian man, this mysterious man from India. Later on, she will say that she found out that this mysterious Indian man who visited her while in Russia in her teens was Master Morya, who she later on happened to encounter, she said, in England. Now, speaking of England, according to her own accounts, Blavatsky was taken to England by her father. This is the first time she's making a major trip where she goes to London and she goes to Bath. However, a lot of people say that this may never have happened, that Dad didn't take her to England and that she made this up. Well, we don't know for sure exactly what happened. Anyway, then she spent a year living with her aunt, and then she moved to Tiflis, Georgia. And there, she had a friendship with a certain Alexander Glutzin, who was a Russian Freemason. Are you seeing some connections here, right? She would then, at this point, claim that she, in connection, would open up to many paranormal experiences, that she, while she's in Georgia, she practiced astral projection, and also she saw the same mysterious man from India in her vision. When she turned 17, um, I don't know exactly what happened, but there was a certain Nikifor Blavatsky. He was in his 40s. He happened to be the vice governor of the Irvin province. And at 17, she decided that she's going to get married. She's going to marry him. Why would she marry him? Well, she kind of didn't know either. So she said that, well, we were both into magic. And so that's what we had in common. Well, but then when it came time to get married, she wanted not to get married. And then when she was actually married, she tried to flee and run away from him. So we don't know the full story, but we do know that eventually she is about to be taken back to Odessa to her family, and she flees. She escapes, and she goes to Constantinople. She goes to the Ottoman Empire, and for the next 9 years, she travels the world. Possibly these travels were financed by her father. Now, Blavatsky did not keep a diary during this time, and she was not accompanied by anybody from her family. So many people say that we can't verify her activities. I'm going to say this: it's kind of yes and kind of no. The interesting part is that Blavatsky is such an exuberant kind of character and so controversial that she attracts so much attention. You just can't help it. Blavatsky, when she enters a room, people notice. And so as she's going from place to place, she attracted different kinds of travelers to travel with her. And these travelers, in turn, did leave accounts. So we do have bits and pieces of accounts by people who encountered her along the way. Again, she's pretty hard to miss. So what happened is that while she's in Constantinople, she develops a friendship with a Hungarian opera singer by the name of Agardi Metrovic. And she claimed that she saved him from being murdered. In fact, she says in one account that she saved him from the gallows in Austria. And he was kind of he was an interesting individual. He's not just an opera singer. He was an advocate for a united Italy. Italy at this time was still kind of a scramble of different states, and the papacy wanted to keep it that way, but he wanted Italy to be united, and he was very patriotic. Well, because of this, the Pope hated him, right, and had him exiled at one point. There's another story where there's going to be there's a bunch of Maltese that were hired by Catholic monks to try to kill him. So he's kind of always on the run. So, so he runs into Blavatsky and they form a deep friendship and they do meet again. So we'll run into him again. Also, while in Constantinople, she met the very beautiful Countess Sophia Keslakova. She was the wife of Pavel Keslakova, who was a brilliant Russian reformer under Nicholas I. I mean, she's beautiful. We don't know a lot about her, but if you want to Google her name, there are so many beautiful paintings of her wearing with her hair and different pearls and coils and lovely dresses, a very wealthy, very attractive woman. And with her, with this very prominent person, Blavatsky toured Egypt and went with her to Greece as well as Eastern Europe. So there is somebody who is there who is quite noteworthy. Well, she goes to Cairo and she meets an American art student by the name of Albert Rawson. She meets Rawson a few times, and Rawson does leave accounts about Blavatsky. In fact, what I find is interesting is Rawson is an author. She's a writer. She likes writing travel stories. And Rawson was actually on her way to join the annual caravan heading for Mecca and was disguised as a Muslim pilgrim. So what happened is, how do I say this? Albert Rawson and Blavatsky got themselves in a little bit of experiments. Blavatsky hadn't tried hashish before. And so Rawson and her were kind of hanging out, and she tried hashish, and apparently she absolutely loved it and would have it many times in the future. And we'll talk more about that later. Also, of course, she did say that this was a success, by the way, the experiment. Also, she visited the Coptic magician, Paulus Metamon. Paulus Metamon, now we're getting into something little odd and controversial. Paulus Metamon was supposedly connected to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. Supposedly connected to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. What is the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light? Well, it's called a Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. It's also called a Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. And Blavatsky's claiming that that this person is a part of this in 1851. And according to sources that we know, this brotherhood did not fully exist until 1870 or 1894. Others say that, well, wait a minute, there could have been an earlier background to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light that goes back to 1851. So, and then there's another story that these are all these stories in the 19th century, that the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light practiced something called sex magic, which is taught by the American occultist by the name of Pascal Beverly Randolph, who lived from 1825 to 1875. This could be conjecture, who knows? But so they practice this as their form of magic. And the claim is that the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light goes back to an earlier group called the Frates Lucas that was founded by Ecker von Eckhofen from the late 1700s. And then this goes back to what's called the German Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross that was founded in the 1750s. Now, why am I doing this? Well, because what happens is this. If I go forward, let's go forward now. For the German Order, the Golden and Rosy Cross, 1750s, Frates Lucas, the late 1700s, and then you have this Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, whether 1851 or 1870. Well, this connects to another group called the OTO. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of the Ordo Templi Orientis that is formed by Carl Kilner. But anyway, there are many that claim that this is that their background is connected to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, one of the many streams that goes into the OTO. And of course, Kilner uh, founds the OTO, some say 1895, although the first manifestation is 1904. And along with another person by the name of Theodore Roos. And when Kilner dies in 1905, Roos takes over, and Roos meets a person by the name of Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley then joins the group in 1910, is admitted into the OTO, writes the Gnostic Mass in 1913. I think you kind of know why I did that, right? So Blavatsky is starting to connect with these other orders and fraternities that will have a significant influence in Western esotericism. So this is kind of where it is. Okay. So she met him. She spent some time with him as well. And I'm not sure if there was any the sex magic stuff. In fact, the funny thing is that others claim that the idea of the sex magic came in later into the OTO. Like I said, when we deal with these mysterious fraternities, it gets in the area of conjecture, and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to be mysterious. Aleister Crowley, though, does pay a lot of attention later on to Blavatsky's career, and a lot of the ideas that are brought up by Blavatsky goes right into Aleister Crowley. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so this is the beginning of many different ideas. She really does start so much. Okay, so she leaves Egypt and she goes to Paris, and she encounters somebody who is a mesmerist, named Victor Michael, who is very impressed by her. And so she now investigates psychic research and hypnotism. Some people say, again, this is hearsay, that she's intentionally learning the art of hypnotism in order to mesmerize people into believing certain things or whatever it may be, have power of the mind. But anyway, hypnotize her with her mind, so to speak. He encouraged her as to be a great medium, so not a medium rare, medium well done. So there it is. And did I say that out loud? I don't know. So he was very important for her spiritual development. Now, he was into something that is called mesmerism. Now, mesmerism was founded by Franz Mesmer in the 18th century. Basically, Mesmer believed that these invisible natural forces, he calls them Lebensmaximus, and that these invisible natural forces possesses all living things, like humans, plants, animals. These natural energies are able to transfer from that which is animated with life to inanimate objects, and of course, this connects to the idea of what's called animal magnetism, right? So those who have a higher degree of animal magnetism, a higher degree of these invisible natural forces, can cure illnesses. Of course, illnesses are caused by obstacles that get in the way of these thousands of these channels that move through your body, these energy channels. And so contact with somebody that has more of this energy acts as a conductor and supposedly unlocks them. So this was used for healing. If you want to block something, so you have echoes of ideas here, right? It's almost the idea of the unblocking chakras from one perspective, or unblocking different parts of the body system as understood by the Greeks and the Romans. So there you have it. Okay, so she's getting into this. She's just she's taking from this, taking from that. She's listening to all of these traditions. But let's keep going. Oh, by the way, we talk about this at the beginning, talk about reincarnation too, and that perked her interest. So, although he thought, Victor Michael thought that she may have a split personality. Oh, there we go. From there, she decided to visit England, and here she supposedly met that mysterious Indian that she had seen in her visions, which was in Russia and, of course, in Georgia. Who is this? But he suddenly appeared, and he was in physical form. He wasn't just a vision; he was real. And she named him Master Morya, Morya, Master Morya. She maintained that he had a special mission for her. She must journey to Tibet. She claimed that Master Morya was one of the masters of ancient wisdom, right? And in fact, uh, later on, it was Morya and another ascended master by the name of Kumi, who are accredited for influencing her into founding the Theosophical Society. Now, they're part of Master Morya and another named Kumi. It's Koot, Kumi, Hoomi, belonged, according to Blavatsky, to a group of highly developed humans that are known as the Great White Brotherhood. The Great White Brotherhood. So they are the masters of ancient wisdom, and they are the Great White Brotherhood. Who are they? Well, Great White Brotherhood is a term that she uses first. She's the first to use the term, the Great White Brotherhood. They are supernatural beings. They have great power. And what they do is they see those who are capable of enlightenment, and they arrive in physical form to visit those people, to give them a message and to teach them and to illuminate them. Okay, so Blavatsky, is apparently one of these individuals. Now, there's another person that really got into the Great White Brotherhood and developed this idea further. And he got it from her, and his name is Aleister Crowley. So, once again, Aleister Crowley is paying attention to Blavatsky's career. Obviously, he's way younger, not existing at this point, but he does take notes. And this is another example. Now, even though she's the first to coin this term, it doesn't mean that it's an original idea. It does go back a little ways to a guy by the name of Karl Echtarthausen, and he writes about the cloud within his book called The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, and he talks about that there's this body of mystics who remain active after their physical deaths on Earth, and they call themselves the Council of Life. Council of Light, maybe Council of Life too. Council of Light. And so, of course, the Great White Brotherhood comes from this idea of the Council of Light. He's also said that they had these powers of reaching those who need to have special knowledge and so forth and so on. By the way, he got his ideas earlier on from what's called the Communion of the Saints, as well as ideas connected to the Rosicrucians and the Illuminati. So all these threads are coming together. She has this. She's now met one of them, and she'll meet another one soon, of these ancient masters from this Council of Light, from the Great White Brotherhood. Okay, so now as far as Master Morya, his personality is depicted in various ways, but they say that he was a very gentle man. He was logical, easygoing, taking endless pains to make things clear. It is claimed that where he lived, in actuality, was Tibet. So he did live in Tibet, according to her beliefs, and he lived near another master, another from the Great White Brotherhood, and his name is Koot Hoomi. The two are described as living near each other in Tibet, with a Buddhist monastery, a Buddhist temple between them with a little pagoda standing there. Okay, so there you have it. So now she's supposed to go eventually to Tibet. That becomes a possible goal for her. But she decided to make her way to Asia via the Americas. So she headed on the way to Canada in 1851. I know she heads to Canada. Hey, Canadians, right? Well, here, because she was inspired by the novels of James Cooper, who wrote about the Native American communities in Quebec. So she wants to go and meet the Native Americans living there. She wants to learn about shamanism and their ways of life. But unfortunately, she was robbed when she got there by somebody from the tribe. She said that the behavior had nothing really to do with them, but it was the influence of Christian missionaries. She then headed south, and where does she go? She goes to New Orleans, right? She wants to investigate spiritual beliefs in New Orleans, and hey, is a good place to go. I mean, you can see, of course, that you'll have the voodoo and the hoodoo there. And then she goes to Texas. I'm not sure what she did in Texas. Who knows? But she got to Texas. And then she went to Mexico, according to the story. You know, again, how much evidence there is of this, I don't know, right? And she got as far, supposedly, as the Andes before she went off to the West Indies, Ceylon. Okay, from there, she finally got to India. When she got to India, according to herself, she spent 2 years in India, and she supposedly found instructions from various letters that Moria had sent her. So she attempted to enter Tibet, but she was unsuccessful, and that's kind of realistic. You know, the British administration did not let her go. You know, they didn't want her to go at all. So she later claimed that she headed back to Europe by ship. She said that she survived a shipwreck on the Cape of Good Hope, and then she arrived in England in 1854. But when she arrived in England in 1854, she faced a lot of hostility. And the reason why is at that time, there was the Crimean War going on in Russia, in the Ukrainian region. And so this war was between Britain and Russia. And because she was of Russian and German, but specifically Russian background, she was looked down upon and not treated very well. Well, she claimed that when she was there, she worked as a concert musician for the Royal Philharmonic Society. We don't know. I don't know. I mean, we haven't found any evidence for that. Is it possible? Maybe. But she did run into Albert Rawson again. Remember Albert Rawson? She, you know, when they're doing hashish back in Cairo. Well, they met again. Yeah, they met again. Uh, and um, and then, of course, she went from there. She went to Chicago, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco, and then she went back to India again. Back to India. This time, she went to Kashmir, and then went to Burma, and then she made a second attempt to enter Tibet. She really wants to go to Tibet. She claimed that this time that she actually made it there. That she somehow got there through Kashmir. Who took her there? She says a Tartar shaman. This Tartar shaman was wanting to go to Siberia, and since she was a Russian citizen, maybe that would be useful for her, for him, to go through that way. Anyway, so they reached Tibet. They got to Leh, but then they got lost, and and that's from there. So they got into Tibet, but they got lost, and she had to return. But kind of got there, right? Maybe. Although a lot of scholars say that she didn't get there. So, but she was there in India from 1855 to 1856. Then she, guess what, went back to France and Germany. This lady travels, you know. Now, again, even if we don't believe her words, if we take those who saw her on the travels, a lot of these, are still all over the place, and she's still traveling everywhere, right? So eventually she returned back to her family. Um, and um, and then, of course, in 1860, she visited her sister, and then she ran into the Hungarian opera singer again, Marotovich, and she reconciled with her husband. Well, I know this is a surprise. She and her husband decided we're going to work on this thing, but they adopted a son by the name of Yuri. But unfortunately, a few things happened. A few disasters happened. She's returning to family life. She's returning to her husband. She's returning to her sister, her maternal grandmother. It looks like she is, the prodigal daughter has come back, and they adopt a child by the name of Yuri. And then what happens is that she was riding on a horse and she fell and it knocked her out. And it was a spinal fracture, and she went into a coma. Yeah, in a coma for quite a few months. She did recover in Tiflis, Georgia. She claimed that this fall had reawakened her not only reawakened her spiritual abilities, made it fully aware as a result of this encounter. But later on, way towards the end of her life, many claim that some of her health problems and bodily problems were a result of this coma and this fall at this time. That it gave her a certain weakness. Well, then of course the real sad part is that her their adopted son died, Yuri, and that was pretty upsetting, obviously. So she did have a few travels during this time. She went to Italy, Transylvania, and Serbia. She did study the Kabbalah. She's studying the Kabbalah now, right? So going into Jewish mysticism. Wow, I mean, what a lady! But after her son died, that pretty well ended whatever relationship she had with her husband. I mean, that's first the coma, and then of course the son dying. Just pretty tragic. And so, 1867, she went to the Balkans, she went to Hungary, and then back to Italy, where she claimed that she was injured fighting for Garibaldi at the Battle of Mentana. This is the great battle. This has to do with Italian independence because Italian independence was very near and dear to her heart, probably because of the Hungarian, right? So what happens after that is that then she claimed to have gained a message from Moria to travel back, to come back, and let's go to Tibet. So she goes to Constantinople, um, and then what happens is supposedly Moria in person met her there, and then they traveled together overland to Tibet. They go through Turkey, they go through Persia, they go through Afghanistan, then to India, and finally enter Tibet via Kashmir. And here they stay with Master Kudhumi, or I should say she stays because he lives his own place down the way, right? So there you have it. So now she's finally in Tibet, at least according to the story. This is according to the belief. And once again, I know you're looking at me like, how can they be physical and yet they're spiritual? And how can this work? And I'm going to explain this briefly because I did promise about this. Now that we have the gang together, because these two spiritual ascended masters are very important. So in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, you have a concept known as the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva, what happens here is that in Buddhism, you go through what's called samsara, which is also the same in Hinduism, where you are born, you live your life, you die, and there's rebirth. And you're born, you live your life, die, rebirth. It goes on, and then of course, eventually, in Hinduism it's moksha. In Buddhism it's nirvana. Of course, you could go the other direction too. But, we're not talking about that. What happens though is that when it comes time for nirvana, you have gained all this spiritual knowledge. You are ready to cross to the other side. what happens is that you make a choice to stay on this side to teach others how to be liberated into nirvana. Because Mahayana Buddhism focuses on an idea called karuna. Karuna is compassion. So that compassion makes them want to stay and to lead others to nirvana. Well, according to certain beliefs, variations, I mean, they live their lives here in a physical form. But Blavatsky kind of builds on this. And so for her, what happens is that these spiritual masters, they are bodhisattvas, they're about to cross to the other side. They decide to stay in this life. But as they stay in this life, their life, because of their energies, are lengthened and they live for centuries in some cases. Does that make sense? So their body, they're still ascended masters, and they decide that rather than be in spiritual form, they will use karuna. They will submit even further to compassion for others, and they will go, all right, I'll even take a physical body. So he's got it. So these are spiritual masters, and so she hangs around them. Now you understand, right? She hangs around them, and they are practitioners of what's called Gluksa sect of Tibetan Buddhism. And during this period of time, he learned so much. Accordingly, he learned a language known as Senzar. Senzar, she claimed to learn this in Tibet. This is like an ancient language that according to she said that she learned this language, and she learned how to read a number of ancient texts that happened to be in this monastery. She said, this is what she says. She says, Senzar is a tongue absent from the nomenclature of languages and dialects with which philology is acquainted, she says. So she claims that this is a language that has no connection to any of our languages today. No connections. In fact, she goes further and she says that this language may be the language of those of Atlantis, and that the book of the Zan, which she said to translate later on, is this mystery speech. It is of this language. But again, we haven't seen this language. We haven't found her sources. It is claimed also that Akut Humi, right, the one spiritual master, and the other, of course, Mori, helped her develop her psychic powers. The masters, they had all these amazing abilities. They had clairvoyance, clairaudience, right? They're able to read people's minds, right? So telepathy. They're able to materialize and dematerialize. They can appear from place to place. They can project their astral bodies. They can move objects. I mean, they are like Jedi Knights. So think of think of the Jedi from Star Wars, and you got the idea. This is what they're supposed to be able to do. All right. So now again, there's many doubts about her going to Tibet, but I will address this. First of all, they'll say there's no way she can get to Tibet because it is closed to Europeans, and it was. Second of all, it was extremely dangerous. There's all these bandits that are along the way. And I get that too. Third, she's very unathletic. How could she have the energy, to even get up? But there's a few other things that say that maybe she did. For example, um, she was accompanied by supposedly Moria. But let's just say she's accompanied by somebody who is from the local area. People from local areas were allowed in Tibet. Maybe she did travel with them, and she said she did, into Tibet, and she was disguised as one of them. She maybe had her head covered and got in there. The other thing that kind of tips off many scholars, like D.T. Suzuki, who's a well-known scholar of Buddhism, takes a look at her form of Mahayana Buddhism, and she goes through this, and she says, you know what, the kind of the kind of Mahayana Buddhism that she knows about in depth happens to be Tibetan Buddhism, but some of the inner mysteries that most Westerners did not know. So how in the world did she get these ideas? I have no idea. Maybe, although Blavatsky herself said that she was not allowed into the Buddhist temple or the monastery. I should say, not allowed the Buddhist monastery, I should say, not temple, not temple. The point of the matter is that she could have gained some kind of knowledge. Also, the other part is that some of her descriptions of places are pretty exact for somebody that hadn't been there, but maybe she heard it from somebody else. So people are on the fence of this one. Anyway, Blavatsky says that she gained the evidence that she needed to know that the spiritualist movement, which was really popular in the 19th century, had some valid claims, and so she went or left Tibet to spread the good news that spiritualism may be true after all. So as she travels back, she goes to Greece, and here she meets another ascended master by the name of Master Hilarion. Master Hilarion, supposedly at one time in a past life, was the Apostle Paul of Tarsus, and later on was the Neoplatonist philosopher by the name of Iamblichus. Some believe that that maybe he was also the Christian saint Hilarion, which is kind of strange because those lifespans between Iamblichus and Hilarion at the same time. Others say, well, you can do that. You can live two lifetimes at the same time. There's no reason for that. So what happens there is that there's communication between them. Blavatsky goes to Egypt, and she claims that she was aboard the SS Unoma, but on July 1871, it exploded during the journey, and Blavatsky was one out of 16 survivors. She reaches Cairo, and when she reaches Cairo, she meets up with Medamon, who we mentioned before. Remember Medamon, right? So we're and others. So we're back to what we talked about earlier, having connections with this particular group that will later have supposed connections to OTO. So she's hanging around them, as well as a certain Emma Cutting. In fact, they form a group called Spiritism. Blavatsky actually forms this group. It lasts for 2 weeks, and Blavatsky closes it down because a lot of those who were working for her were not real mediums. They didn't have any psychic abilities. They're a bunch of charlatans. And so she herself ended that connection. Okay, then in Cairo, she also met with another ascended master by the name of Serapis Bey. So this is the fourth one that she meets. And so there you have it. So far she has met 4 ascended masters in human form. She then met Lydia Pashkova, who was a writer by trade, and now we have writings by her where she's visiting Syria. She's going to Palestine and Lebanon, and we know this because we have somebody else who's writing about this. Blavatsky at this time studies the mysterious beliefs of the Druze in the Lebanon area. Then she goes to Bucharest and Paris, and finally Moria says, go to the United States. And so she arrives in New York City. In New York City, she lives in a women's housing cooperative on Manhattan's Lower East Side. She does leather work. She also designs advertising cards to make sustenance. During this time, she meets a certain Miss Elizabeth Holt, who was staying there. And from here, we get a description, a very early description of Blavatsky. And I'm going to read this description. Okay, so she says, this is what Miss Elizabeth Holt says of Blavatsky at this time. Again, it's 1873. It says, Madame Blavatsky sat in the office a large part of her time, but she seldom sat alone. She was like a magnet, powerful enough to draw around her everyone who could possibly come. I saw her day by day, sitting there rolling her cigarettes and smoking incessantly. She had a conspicuous tobacco pouch, the head of some fur bearing animal, which she wore around her neck. So she has a pouch with some animal head on around her neck. She was certainly an unusual figure. I think she must have been taller than she looked. She was so broad, and she had a broad face and broad shoulders. Her hair was lightish brown and crinkled. Her whole appearance conveyed the idea of power. Now she wrote this account about 50 years later. So she actually compares her to when a person meets Stalin. And I don't think that's, it's like meeting Stalin, because Stalin was, around 50 years later. That's not a, anyway, moving right along. Okay, so Blavatsky, they weren't sure if she was an aristocrat or a Russian that's just simply down on her luck. One time there's this lady that was attacked by a man in the streets, and she comes running in. And it's interesting because Blavatsky says that, well, you know what you do to men who do this kind of thing? And she takes out a knife under the fold of her dress and said that she had it for any man who tries to molest her. It was her tobacco cutting knife. So apparently she was fierce and she was ready for anything. And I can imagine if she's traveling all these places that Blavatsky would have been very vulnerable. But she's certainly feisty enough, and I'm sure she may have fought back and attacked men who had tried to do something like this. Now, what happened is that accordingly, that there's more that she wrote about. Holt wrote about that she liked talking about spiritual topics, and she liked talking about what are called deki. These are elementals who were tricksy little beings. She also enjoyed talking about reincarnation and past lives and so forth. So there you have it. Now, Blavatsky then moved to a home for working women in another place where she gets interviewed by a journalist by the name of Anna Ballard of the New York newspaper, The Sun. And they asked her lots of questions. So now she's becoming an object of curiosity. The story that they like to hear was when she talked about her adventures in India. They wanted to hear about the gruesome rope trick. Gruesome rope trick? Yeah, okay. So the gruesome rope trick that Blavatsky describes to this writer goes as follows. You grasp one end of a ball of cord in his hand, then a juggler threw up the ball, which went out of sight, then swiftly climbed the vertical cord until he too was out of sight. So basically, you got this cord, he climbs up this cord because he's going to catch this ball, and they both disappear into the sky out of sight. Then all of a sudden, body pieces fall and they were placed in the basket. Finally, the basket was upturned and the man was brought back together again. So there you have it. It's like, so, he goes up this rope, they throw the ball up, he goes up, he disappears, body pieces fall down, they're put into a basket, and then open the basket, and he's one man again. So that was one of the stories that fascinated the Sun. So, yeah, okay. So what happens then is you have more descriptions of her. A certain Hannah Shepherd Wolf, when she moved to the women's home on Elizabeth Street, describes her that I saw half sitting, half reclining on a carpetless floor, a scantily clad, and then thought very unprepossessing woman who was introduced as Madame Blavatsky. She was stout, though not unwieldy. Her eyes were magnetic and peculiar, with a strange fascination in their blue-gray depths, but were, in a sense, beautiful. She also talked about the woolly texture of her light-colored hair, right? And also, she smoked sometimes as much as a pound's weight of tobacco a day. So she's a constant smoker, right? Well, next she moves out of there and she moves in with the French widow. And so, and there she keeps talking about according to the widow, she talks about these Deke again, these jinn-like creatures, these tricksters. There's one story where she's staying with this French widow, where they're serving breakfast downstairs, and she's not coming, and she's crying for help. And according to the story, these little sprites, these little jinn-like, trickster-like creatures had sewn her to the bed. And according to the story, she could not have sewn herself into the bed in this way. So it's kind of reminds me a little bit of Gulliver's Travels, right? So that happens. Then some good news. Well, maybe not good news, but to receive news of her father's death, that's not the good news. But Dad was rich, and Dad left her a fortune. Now they said that she was spending money like crazy. And Mrs. Wolf says, I soon learned that she was addicted to the use of hashish. She several times endeavored to persuade me to try the effects upon myself. She said she had smoked opium, seen its visions and dreams, but that the beatitude enjoyed in the use of hashish were heaven as to hell. She said that she found nothing to compare with its effects in arousing and stimulating the imagination. So I guess she's using a lot of hashish with her newfound money from Dad. In December of 1874, she met a Georgian, Mikhail Petanli, and they became infatuated, and they got married. But that's kind of bigamy because she's already married, but she got divorced, so it wasn't bigamy for long. You just can't make this up, right? Blavatsky was intrigued by a story of two boys, a William and Horatio Eddy. Now, these brothers were in Chittenden, Vermont, who could claim that they could levitate and they could manifest various spiritual phenomena. Well, there was another person, this is important to the story. There's another person that was interested in these same two boys. His name was Henry Steele Olcott, also known as the Colonel. These two will be inseparable for much of the rest of her career. These are the two that become involved in Theosophy. So this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship. So Henry Steele Olcott, he was known as the Colonel. He was the agricultural correspondent for the New York Tribune for a while. And then during the Civil War, he became the special commissioner of the War Department in New York, and then became a colonel and transferred to the Department of the Navy in Washington, D.C. By the way, you may recognize his name, as Henry Steele Olcott was one of those who investigated the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865. So he was part of that. After the war, he became a lawyer who specialized in insurance, revenue, and fraud. So what will happen is he checks out these brothers first, and then later on Blavatsky will. So let's talk about these brothers. The story goes is there's a certain Zephaniah Eddy. He's a farmer, and he marries a girl of Scots descent by the name of Julia, and they get a farm in Chittenden. Julia, she was gifted. She had the gift of clairvoyance, but she could also see ghosts. Now, she said, of course, this is a family trait because, well, her great grandmother was actually hanged as a witch. So this kind of goes with the family. Well, she married Zephaniah, and Zephaniah didn't want to talk about these matters. He doesn't believe in this stuff, or I should say, he doesn't believe in it, but stuff unless it's too real. And then if it's too real, then it's the devil. So that's kind of his mentality. So he encourages her not to use her spiritual gifts. They have their first child. The first child doesn't have any gifts. He's like, since he doesn't run in the family after all. Well, the next two kids come along, brothers, and they both have this supposed gift. And according to the story, is that when they're sleeping at night, their little bodies will lift gently and float through the air by some power, right? They tried to go to school, but what happened the whole time is that there was supernatural occurrences in school that distracted the other kids. There's rapping sounds and things flying and so forth. And so, well, that's not working. So they pulled these the two brothers out of school. There's one pretty scary story that goes on that one night Horatio, that's one of the brothers, when he's 4 years old, he saw this creature covered with white fur. And then what happened is that he saw it, and then the other children saw this, whatever this is, and it became a luminous cloud, and then it turned into some human form before it disappeared. Ooh, okay. Well, okay, so now lots of things are going on, and what happens is Zephaniah believes in the devil. He tries to stop it, and he can't stop it. So I don't know. This is kind of funny. He goes, well, if I can't stop it, then I might as well make some money off of it. Huh? So what he does is he decides to exploit it and put his two sons, use it for entertainment. And so he creates his own circle room with a balustrade along it, and they are able to do supposedly all these kinds of acts and tricks and conjure these things up. And so what happens is the colonel goes and he visits this. He sees what they're doing. Of course, the lights are extremely dim. There's a murky lamp, and supposedly, according to the story, is that you're going to have 25 people all at one time. While he was there, the spirit from a American Indian woman appears, the name of Honto. And then what she does is that she has this knitted shawl, and then she throws it over the balustrade, and it becomes manifest so people can see it. But at first, he looks at it. He's not, is that an Indian, or is that just somebody wearing an Indian dress? He also noticed that sometimes the voice sounded falsetto. He also saw there's a manifestation of the spirit of Bright Star, and at the same time, he wasn't so sure about that. There's a spirit also of Chief Santam of the Winnebago, and he appears, according to the story. Also, the spirit of William Reynolds, who just had died. He appears dressed in black with his full beard. Even his brother appears, as well as William Brown, another man of New York. What happens is that at William Eddy's request, that's the other brother's name, he asked a lady in the audience who's a German music teacher, that asked to play the flute. Okay, so I'm sorry, I should have a male music teacher. He's a German music teacher by the name of Max Lenzberg. And so what happens is that so he goes ahead and he plays the flute, and then what happens is that suddenly there is what appears is these two spirits of little ones, and Mrs. Lenzberg sees them and identifies them as her daughters. And she asks, "Are you my daughters that have passed on?" And they rap, and so forth. And of course, then again, there we go. So this is looked at as proof. This is looked at as evidence. Well, Blavatsky decided that she's going to visit Chittenden, visit the circle on October 1874, and meets the colonel there, who's investigating this. So they go there, and so what happens is that they start to get to know each other, And so what happens then is that a long and the short of it is that they decide that they want to pair up. They have the same sort of interests, same commonalities. So there was a meeting. Let's see, here it is. I'm sorry, my notes are falling apart here. Just give me a few seconds here. Okay. So what happens is that two become friends and they develop names for one another. Alcott is called Maloney, and she wants to be called Jack. I don't know why she wants to be called Jack. And she instructs Alcott on her belief system and tells him he needs to be celibate and teetotaling, and also tells him that he needs to become a vegetarian. The funny thing is, she never became a vegetarian, but she wanted him to become a vegetarian. So there. They also visited other mediums who were kind of touring about for a while. Then what happens is that while in New York, Blavatsky runs into, once again, Rawson one more time. Remember them. And what happens is once more, she is all talking about hashish. Apparently, this is her hashish buddy. So they hang out together, and she says hashish multiplies one's life 1,000-fold, and so forth and so on. Okay, so now Blavatsky and Olcott publish a circular letter in a Boston-based spiritualist publication by the name of the Spiritual Scientist. And they named themselves the Brotherhood of Luxor, the Brother of Luxor. You kind of see a connection to the early Egyptian connection, right? So soon they began living together in a series of rented New York apartments, funded by Alcott, of course. Then they create what's called the Miracle Club. Miracle Club. And they're joined by an Irish spiritualist by the name of William Quan Judge, who now becomes like the third member of their group. Now arrives another mystery, and that is John King. John King in this case, is a pure spirit in many ways. He's a pure spirit. He is like a ghost, but he's not a ghost. He's earth haunting his habits. So he is a deceased person. So unlike these ascended masters that we're talking about, this is an actual spirit, right? Supposedly. He lived during the reign of Charles II and was kind of a crazy kind of individual. He became a guardian angel in many ways for Blavatsky. And so what happens is that this John King helps encourage Blavatsky as well as Alcott to form a new group. And you'll see where we're going in a little bit. But Blavatsky says as follows about John King. He says, the spirit of John King is very fond of me, and I am fonder of him than of anything on earth. He is my only friend, and I am indebted to anyone for the radical change of my ideas of life, my strivings, and so on. It is to him alone. He has transformed me, and I shall be indebted to him when I go to the garret, for not having to dwell for whole centuries, it may be, in darkness and gloom. John and I are acquainted from old times, long before he began to materialize in London and take walk to the medium's house with a lamp in his hand. And so she talks about that. So now he is described like an Apollonius of Tyana. So this John King then becomes friends of the colonel. Okay, so now they're becoming friends. And John King supposedly then introduces the colonel to other masters, 4 other masters. One is the Copt, is a Coptic gentleman. One is a Neoplatonist from the Alexandrian school. One is the master of masters. He's a Venetian. And finally, one is an English philosopher. And so occult is now being introduced to these other masters. So at first, Alcott thought that John King was a disincarnate spirit, but then he believed that John King was actually four different kinds of spirits. And had an independent personality. He was also a messenger. He was also a servant, and he was also an elemental spirit. So, so he has four different forms. It gets even more complicated because John King apparently then connects them to another spiritual master by the name of Tutit Bey, and so who sends a message to them through something called precipitation. Precipitation, and so the idea is this Tolpit Bey, the spiritual master, who is actually one who's a physical form in this case, unlike the John, the John King one, sends a message through precipitation. And what happens is that you can, this is better than email, or maybe it's just as good. But in those days, you send a letter, and of course, you've heard of letters before. I don't know if you've ever heard of these. Now and then you can check the mailbox. There could be one of those in there. But anyway, as opposed to sending a letter, what happened is that Toltit Bey would send it in an ethereal sense, and it would drop out, go through the air and drop from the ceiling and then down. And in this one, Toltit Bey writes a letter to the colonel, encouraging him to treat Blavatsky in a wonderful way and to treat her with respect, and of course reveals different mysteries to him, but also he urges the creation of a brotherhood. Okay, so what happens is Blavatsky now needs to, now this idea that we're going to have this brotherhood of Luxor. What we're going to do is we're going to advertise it. So they advertise this for a little while, and meanwhile, they actually there's this journal that's about to go broke. It's a spiritual journal that's called Spiritual Scientist, and they volunteered to advertise their new brotherhood of Luxor in this particular periodical, and so they financed them for a while, and so that's good. But the guy who had the magazine, who had the periodical, he still kept losing money, and they finally gave up on that. Meanwhile, another spiritual entity by the Serapis, named Serapis, is writing the Colonel. Well, then they form. I told you about the Miracle Club. So at the Miracle Club, here we go. We're finally at the. I know it's 9:31, but here we are. Finally, the creation of Theosophy. I want to get into the creation of Theosophy, talk a little bit about it, and talk about a little bit about Atlantis and Lemuria and a few other things. Then we'll close up. But at a miracle meeting on September 7th, 1875, Blavatsky, Alcott, and Judge, they meet with a Charles Southern, and they have this speaker. The speaker, he at the Miracle Club, because the idea is going to hear, it would be like this, right? You're the Miracle Club. And so the whole reason for the Miracle Club is to hear various speakers talk about the occult and mysteries and all sorts of things, just like you are doing right here. And this one speaker, his name is Mr. Felt, spoke on the lost canon, a proportion of the Egyptians. He claimed he had discovered the magical formula that enabled the creation of the pyramids as well as the other mighty buildings in ancient Egypt. And of course, this formula has in it a square, and within it a circle, and within that another square, and within that 3 triangles, and within that a 5-sided figure. And then he talked about how this was used as a special measure, as the canon of proportion. And one person in the audience, he happened to be into the Kabbalah, asked Mr. Felton if he could evoke spirits using this symbol, and Mr. Felt jumped up straight away and replied that one certainly could. You can make apparitions appear with this particular symbol. Well, this is kind of an exciting talk for the Miracle Club. And they're all talking afterwards, going on and on. And during this discussion, the colonel was thinking, we need to have a society that researches the occult, that investigates these kinds of mysteries that we just heard from the proper and good Mr. Felton. This idea. And he's sitting there, he looked up Blavatsky. We could do this, you know? And Blavatsky kind of nodded her head, yeah, maybe we should. And then he kind of hesitates for a few moments, you know, because he has to stand up in front of everybody. And finally, he makes his proclamation. They're going to form a group that will later on become the Theosophical Society. But there's no name yet. We should have a society that investigates the esoteric. They have a second meeting, and Mr. Felt is also there. And at their third meeting, they actually come up with the name. Mr. Southern, who is the fourth person who helped form the group, he found a word in the dictionary, theosophy. And he said, okay, well, Greek theos means God. Sophia means wisdom. Thus, it is God wisdom. It is divine wisdom. That's a perfect name. We are the Divine Wisdom Society. So, Theosophical Society, making sense. And this word theosophy was used by others, specifically used by Neoplatonists. So it was perfect. They formed not only a Theosophical Society, they decided who's going to be in charge. Alcott, the colonel, was the chairman. The judge was the secretary, and Blavatsky was the corresponding secretary, although she was really in charge. But and they wanted to look at large umbrella. They want to look at all kinds of different topics. They want to look at everything from the Hindu sages to Platonism to other Hermeticism to other esoteric things. They saw themselves as continuing on from the legacy of the Neoplatonic philosophers of late antiquity. And so they came up with their three major ideas. Number one, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. By the way, that's really forward. I'm going to read it one more time. Very, very modern. To form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, to be sisterhood though, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. Okay, all inclusive. Number two, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. Number three, to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. So there you have it. So the society is formed. Blavatsky at this time calls herself as a monotheistic immanence and a mystical cosmologist, or she says I'm basically a pantheist, right? So basically that's his idea. She believed that there is a divine principle, which is the root of all, from which all proceeds, which all emanates, and within all shall be absorbed at the end of the great cycle. So all things emanate from the one, and eventually all those things shall return, right? Okay, so there you have it. Of course, what will happen is they'll investigate Western esotericism, but they will they'll study also Eastern beliefs, and they'll bring in ideas in the vocabulary of Eastern beliefs and bring it together. Well, Blavatsky wants to write something that will encompass all of this. So she writes, of course, the work known as The Veil of Isis. At least that's the title she thought. It became Isis Unveiled because the publisher changed it. But anyway, what she decided to do is bring all of these ideas from the West and the East together in this very long collection, which I have right here. So there's the collection, almost 1,000 pages worth of materials, which I did use for this talk. So there you have it. And she said that when she wrote this work, she felt like there's a second consciousness that was with her that inspired much of the writing. It wasn't just her, it's something else. And if you've ever read this work, it's pretty amazing. I mean, sure, there's problems with it when it comes to scholarship. Yes, there are contradictions here and there. Yes, there are things that we now know as a science are not true, but there's other things that are truly amazing. And it reveals to me after reading this work that she has a copious memory. She's brilliant. I mean, extremely intelligent. And she has a good way of putting ideas together. So she writes this work, and it is published. Although at first she does not believe in reincarnation, she's interested in it, but she doesn't put it into the book itself. That will be put into her next book. Isis Unveiled focuses on 10 points. And these points are first, number one, there is no miracle. Everything that happens is the result of law, but it's an eternal law, it's an immutable law, and it's also ever active. Number two, nature is triune. There is a visible, objective nature, an invisible, indwelling, energizing nature, which is the exact model of the other, and its vital principle. And above these two spirits, the sources of all forces, alone you have the eternal and the indestructible. So once again, you got the invisible right there. You got the energizing nature, and then you have something that transcends both. So there it is. Number three, she says that humanity is also triune, right? So that humanity has three parts: a divine spark, an astral fluid, and a physical body. Once again, divine spark, astral fluid, and physical body. Fourth, magic as a science is the knowledge of these principles. Fifth, arcane knowledge misapplied is sorcery. Six, mediumship is the opposite of adeptship. The mediumship is the passive instrument of foreign influences. Seventh, all things that ever were, that are, or will be having the record upon the astral light or tablet of the unseen universe can know all that has been known or can be known. So all knowledge is possible. Eighth, races of men differ in spiritual gifts. Ninth, one phase of magical skill is the voluntary and the conscious withdrawal of the inner man, astral form, from the outer man, physical body. And finally, 10th, the cornerstone of magic is an intimate practical knowledge of magnetism and electricity, these qualities, correlations, and potencies. In fact, in many cases, she talks about the idea that what we know in a religious sense are also science. So again, I need to wrap up, but I want to say a few other things. Let's just finish up where we're at. So basically, Theosophical Society is formed, and what does she do? She goes off back to India, where she hangs out with what's called the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj, they're very much into Indian nationalism and bringing Indian spirituality together. And which is interesting is that when she arrives, this Theosophical Society is very empathetic towards Hindus, and the Christian missionaries don't want her there. The English administration doesn't want her there. They see her as a spy. In fact, British intelligence tracks her down. She's up to no good because she is championing Indian religion under British rule and possibly connected to the politics. However, those in India love the Theosophical Society. So now you're having individuals, many people who are non-Western, that are part of this and joining this society. And then, of course, what happens in the end is that it becomes very big. We're almost done. But then there is a scandal. What happened is that a certain Emma Cologne and her husband, they fell into poverty in Ceylon, and Blavatsky invited them to move into her home in Bombay. And, she wanted to get a job, but they couldn't find a job. So she had them work for her. Well, here is the problem. The problem is that uh, she is going to leave for a little while, and because of that, they're going to cause a problem after she leaves. So let's tell you where she goes, and then I'll tell you what's going to happen. So what happens is that she goes off. She has Bright's disease, and so she has to kind of, in India for her is not as healthy, and she does for a short period of time. She stays at a new estate at Adyar, but then and she goes to Tibet, but her health is deteriorating, and so accompanied by Alcott, we go back to Britain during this period of time. She made contact with the Society of Psychical Research, which is known SPR, but they didn't like her very well. They didn't like her at all. In fact, they're connected to also her downfall in many different ways. Meanwhile, the Colognes, who are living in her place in Bombay, who are part of the Theosophical Society, what they are doing is they misappropriated the funds for their own purposes. And so they were found out, and they're supposed to be thrown out. Blavatsky doesn't know at this time. It's supposed to be thrown out because they're stealing from the fund. And they say, well, if you throw us out, we're going to prove that Blavatsky is a fake, that she's a fraud, that she's making things up. And they try to blackmail. They try to blackmail those within the Theosophical Society in India not to say anything and not to kick them out because they have something on Madame Blavatsky. Well, they kick them out anyway. And so what happens is that this couple then goes to the Madras base Christian College magazine, and they publish this article saying that Blavatsky's ideas are all fraudulent. She's a phony. She's a fake. And so this story becomes popular and spreads everywhere. Well, of course, Blavatsky is freaking out. She's pretty upset. Her health is going downhill as it is, and now you have this negative press going about. Well, she settles in Naples, Italy in 1885, and she lives off a small pension. She writes the next big book called The Secret Doctrine during this time, but she continues to be very ill. Then the SPR, remember that society I mentioned? What they do is they pick up on these claims and these stories, and then they make the assertion that, yeah, Blavatsky's a fraud and she's not true. And so Blavatsky's about to sue them, but Alcott, the colonel, says, don't do it, because doing such things would only damage the society. I want to tell you something. The SPR published this. They ruined her career. They ruined her credibility, whether you believe she's a charlatan or not. It was just not a nice thing to do. Here's what happened. In 1986, the SPR admitted that they messed up on what they said about Blavatsky, and they officially retracted the findings of the report. The report itself was made on hearsay. It had no strong support, and they were as guilty as what they were accusing Madame Blavatsky of. 1986, finally she was vindicated, a little too late for her lifetime. Still, so many did believe in her and what she had to say. And so what happened is now she's in a wheelchair at this time. She moves to Belgium, and she gets money from a small ink producing business. And then what she does is she helps establish the Blavatsky Lodge in London. A famous W.B. Yeats is a part of it. Is a part of it. Then she forms what's called the Esoteric section of the Theosophical Society for the true Theosophists. And then she writes her Secret Doctrine. But I want to say I want to finish her life, and then I'll talk about Secret Doctrine, and then we're done. But I want to mention that she was visited by Mahatma Gandhi, who was studying the Bhagavad Gita at this time. He became an associate member of Blavatsky's lodge, in March of 1891. Gandhi says that he was moved to her works, especially the key to Theosophy, amazed by it. In fact, he said that he follows her school, but not the school of Annie Besant or Leadbeater. But he did see himself as part of Theosophy, but only the Madame Blavatsky kind. And he thought that she was a pretty amazing person. So that's good. So Gandhi wasn't scared off by all the hearsay or the various stories. But unfortunately, eventually, Madame Blavatsky continues to deteriorate, and finally, um, she dies on May 8th, 1891, in Besant's house. And of course, Annie Besant then becomes the head of the Theosophical Society after her. And there you have it. So what she left with, but before she died, she wrote a few works, and the most important one happened to be the Secret Doctrine. This will be it. The Secret Doctrine. She talked about the fact that the primordial essence separated into 7 rays, and these 7 rays created the universe using an energy called Fohat. These 7 rays corresponded to the Greek alphabet. They're also known as the 7 heavens. And these rays she had represented through the spiritual masters that she met throughout her life. The first ray was Master Moya, and he's connected to the idea of unshakable strength. So that's what he helps guide people to believe. Second ray is Master Kuthumi. This is the ray of wisdom. The third ray is of the Venetian. And of course, this is the idea of becoming a good, being adaptable to various things, various situations, being tactful, which is interesting. Fourth ray is Master Serapis, connected to harmony and beauty. Then, of course, the fifth ray is Master Hilarion, who is connected to the idea of science observation. The sixth ray is Master Jesus, who is connected to the devotional saints and mystics of every religion. And the seventh ray is Saint Germain, who works to a large extent in ceremonial magic and employs the service of the great angels. She talked about that the earth went through 7 rounds, and there's 7 living creatures that were living during the 7 ages. And they call them the root races. The first race that that existed, the first root one was called the imperishable sacred land. These were the first pilgrims of the first root race, and they lived during the time of the primordial liquid of the earth. Their bodies were etheric rather than organic, and they lived around the north and south poles. The second root race was Hyperboreans. They were made out of pure spirit, but they also had watery bodies and were able to assume diverse and monstrous shapes as they experimented with the physical world. And they were also the ones that multiplied by division as well as the previous one. So you have, in a sense, we're like amoeba in many ways. The third race lived in the continent of Lemuria. And here, they were a physical shape. They were humans, but the Lemurians were primitive, ruled by kings. They built massive and crude cities. They had exceptional psychic powers, and they believed in almost a monotheistic belief system. The next group were the Atlanteans. That's right. Those of Atlantis, they were next. They had physical bodies, psychic powers. She believed it could have been giants. They mated with she animals, gorillas and chimpanzees at times. And when the continent sunk, they groups from their society went to Egypt. Others went to the Americas. And so The Atlanteans themselves were of two races. One was a warrior race, and the other were a priestly meditative race. And so there you have it. In fact, she said that during this time, and perhaps earlier, there were all these subterranean passages that were known by those who had special secret knowledge, and these passageways that go under the earth connect everything together. In fact, she says that there was possibly a passageway that went from India under the ocean to Atlantis. She mentions a few of the caves that were openings to these passageways in India, one at Ellora, one at El Fata, and one at the Ajunta Caverns. So she talks about that. She says, in fact, the word Atlantis she says, is not even Greek. She claims. She says that its roots have nothing connected to the Greek language, and that is true. But I know that the word Atlantis can connect to a Minoan and through the Mycenaeans. We don't know this at that time. But she makes a connection to the word Atlantis and Atlas to the Toltec language because they have this very hard edge or in their language. She also says that the Lemurians and those of Atlantis, when it comes to the continent, may be exactly the same kind of place. The third root language race was kind of controversial. Those are the Aryans or Indo-Europeans, and they are the next group. The next group, finally, the fifth group is the Maitreya, and then finally, humanity would develop from this root language, the root groups finally, and then of course you have the seventh root language group and so forth and so on. Anyway, so what happens is the next race is yet to come. So we don't know where we're going to go from here, according to Blavatsky. So the seventh is completely unknown as of yet. She also translated the book of Dizyan from that mystical language that nobody can read. And then, of course, she wrote another work called The Voice of Silence. She actually wrote quite a bit. So Blavatsky is a controversial figure. So how do we look at her? I mean, some of the things I said tonight are pretty incredible. And I know that it's a challenge when it comes to a person's beliefs. But I want to be very careful because at the same time, we can't fully know what is true and what is not. Fully know. I mean, I do see some inaccuracies within the works when it comes to historical aspects. But remember, she is teaching a belief system. She is teaching a religious system. She is teaching a form of spirituality. And so, the point of the matter is she developed texts as followers, and she does bring together so much of Western esotericism together, as you saw. So much of what we know, not only of the occult within the modern world, but even moving into what is understood as the New Age movement, starts with Madame Blavatsky. She is, whether you agree with her or not, let's say it, she is extremely intelligent. She's extremely creative, very, very creative. She has the command of different ideas, quite a bit of knowledge, and she knew how to market it, and she knew how to address others and to convince them to believe it. And she was an incredible woman. She was somebody that went to areas that were oftentimes not acceptable for Victorian women to enter. She went to places, saw people, and engaged in activities that Victorian women were not expected to do. So she is breaking through when it comes to gender norms. And that is a great contribution. It really is. At the same time, she was very well traveled. She learned so much about the world. She had a photographic memory. And so we don't know. Because the thing is, the reality is, when we look at all different religions, if we look at the Hebrew Bible and we read the stories of the prophets, and we go, ooh, this is, you know, many people believe that, others don't. But we have to make sure that we don't judge them. Got it? We move into Christianity, we look at the New Testament and the miracles of Jesus, right? No, there are things that are happening, right? We don't, right? Are you guys getting this, right? So we go to different religions. Within Hinduism, Buddhism, a lot of the cornerstones are these acts, these miraculous acts that we say are magical or mystical or whatever they are, but they are there. They're doing something, and it's evidential. And who are we to say that she didn't have something extra that gave her an edge? Maybe she did have some spiritual powers. Maybe some of this is true. Maybe none of it's true. But you know what? I'll let you decide. I'm not going to decide for you. I'm going to let you decide whether or not Madame Blavatsky is really having these experiences, or, you know, she's making it all up, or she's somewhere in the halfway house in between. But at the same time, we have to be very respectful, because the Theosophical Society is alive and well today. And many people practice this belief system, or I should say, not belief system, but the canopy. I'll be corrected very quickly, right? The Theosophical Society investigates all these areas, which is a gigantic umbrella that encompasses many different beliefs. I want to mention that in India, did you know that Madame Blavatsky and the Colonel had themselves converted over to Buddhism? Actually, this happened in Ceylon. They converted over officially to Buddhism. And yet, you know, the Theosophical Society is open to all these different belief systems, whether you're pagan, whether you're Christian, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Buddhist, whatever you are, it's open. But it looks into the esoteric. It looks into the arcane. It looks into the mysterious. It looks into the magic. It looks into the mystical. And you know what? Maybe we need a little bit more magic and mystery in our lives. Maybe we do. And I gotta tell you, pick up a book by Madame Blavatsky. I guarantee it, whether you believe it or not, you will be properly entertained. It will ignite your imagination. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
All right, here we go. Any questions? A lot of information. I'm echoing.
Got an echo.
Echo. Okay, stop.
Okay.
Okay, any questions? You guys enjoy the talk? You learn some things about Blavatsky?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. So, any thoughts? Right. I think it's amazing how she connects to so many different groups throughout her. You can almost draw a tree of all the different lodges and fraternal orders and esoteric orders, and from her.
Gandhi, for heaven's sakes.
Huh?
Gandhi.
I mean, Gandhi liked her and joined her lodge.
Yeah.
In 1891. Yeah, loved her. Thought she's great. Read Isis Unveiled.
Yeah.
So he got through it. So, so yeah. And you heard the list of people who thought she was wonderful. Oh, I forgot to mention, when she left for New York, a guy by the name of Thomas Edison chased after her to give her one of his inventions. It's like, this is pretty amazing stuff, So I mean, so she was definitely beloved by quite a few very important figures, true shakers and makers of history. I mean, you take a look at this list. I mean, as I said, you got Thomas Edison, T.S. Eliot, Robert Duncan, Lewis Carroll, Carl Jung, Lawrence of Arabia, Jack London, Jean Sibelius, Thornton Wilder, even Forrester, I mean, you look at this list, you're just amazed. It's amazing just to think of all these people who were inspired by her. And if anything, I should have added that they were inspired by her. I mean, they loved her stuff. It helped their creative abilities. And isn't that also another benefit?
Mhm.
Whether or not you believe what she said, what she stirred up. And she also stirred up the idea that, science and spirituality could be two sides of one coin. She got to the point where she believed in that so much that her first volume of Isis Unveiled is called Science. And her second volume is called Theology. So she literally is seeing these, and I think that some of these inventors and thinkers are going, maybe it's two sides of one coin. Other people looked up to her. Of course, Aleister Crowley. Aleister was inspired by what she had to say. Jack says, fascinating woman with such intriguing ideas. Whether you believe them or not, her writings sparked so many different ideas. Yeah, they really did. And maybe she has the gift of creativity. I always think back when she was a little girl. Not that I was there. I'm not one of the adepts, visiting her, and it's like, but I recollect talking about it. I'm gonna watch myself there. I recollect that she loved telling stories. As a little girl, she was a storyteller, and that's what she did. And I think that she was a storyteller all the way to the end of her life. Now, how much of those stories were true or not? But they were good stories. You notice all the authors that love her? I just mentioned a whole litany list of authors that thought, hey, this, and of course they like her because she does inspire different perspectives. In fact, what happened is when you read her work, Isis Unveiled, what I think is fun, I recommend reading both, is that she goes on so many different topics. She talks a lot about ancient Greeks and the Romans philosophies, and he talks about Tibetan mystics, and secret communication systems, and all this cool stuff. Some of her ideas and what she talks about do link into some of the writings, and they go somewhere else. I should have mentioned this. Her writings inspire the pulp novelists who connect to ancient ideas with their novels, and so these pulp novelists will incorporate many of her ideas into their stories during the 19 teens and to the 1920s and 1930s, and mix that with new ideas of the horror genre, and mix that with ideas of science fiction, also connected to that thread of thought. So that's another one. Yeah. So the idea of underground tunnels too, that idea spreads. Right now we're experiencing that idea as the reptilians. All right. Seriously, this is the underground Earth. She's one of the first ones to talk about the hollow Earth theory. And then it goes into these other connections. She's a big advocate for the idea of Atlantis that becomes very popular, even though it existed with Plato and so forth. I'm talking about putting the New Age spin on it. That was Madame Blavatsky. The Lemurian stories, that's her, right? That's a lot of her ideas inspired that, and spread to late 19th century and especially early 20th century writers and thinkers. And so you're going to have in these novels stories of Atlantis and Lemuria. That's her too. So what a gift. So I think the world's a little better for her as opposed to not. Any other questions or any questions? Right. Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight.
I did.
Yep. And I guess we'll close it up.
Okay.